what is going on, everybody? Hope everybody's enjoying their day so far. We are back with another weekly fantasy football live show. We'll be going through our weekly Week 17 fantasy starts and sits. We'll also be going through some takeaways from Week 16, doing our annual studs and duds. And then we'll also be looking at some injuries and news heading into Week 17 of this fantasy football championship weekend. So if you survive and advance from the semifinal round, in advance all the way to the championship, congratulations. And now let's go ahead and try to win a championship to close out this 2025 campaign before we turn our attention to the 2026 season. So this will be our final look at our starts and sits. So on next week's show, we will kind of give a little bit of a recap of this 2025 season, give our overall studs and duds, kind of go look back of the first round of these fantasy football drafts, what happened in the preseason, what picks were really good, and what picks were kind of disappointing. So we will go through all of that on next week's show. So we will have one more fantasy football live show, but this will be the final show where we look at our fantasy starts and sits, as most leagues will be wrapping up with their championship in Week 17, because Week 18, well, most of the teams around the league aren't going to be playing their starters. Especially those who have already locked up a playoff, in the playoffs spot or their playoff seeding. So before we get into our Week 17 fantasy starts and sits, let's go ahead and dive into our Week 16 studs and duds. Starting with the quarterback stud of the week, that's going to be Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers. And what a game it was for the 49ers last night, a 48-27 win on the road. 49ers with the win have clinched a playoff spot. Looking at this whole entire 49ers offense, George Kittle had 7 receptions, 115 yards, and a touchdown. You also had Christian McCaffrey get 2 touchdowns, well over 30 fantasy points. So Brock Purdy, the past couple of weeks, he's really been solid, been a top 10 fantasy quarterback for the past couple of weeks. 295 passing yards, 5 passing touchdowns. Did have 2 rushing attempts and 11 yards to finish his day at 31.9 fantasy points. And Brock Purdy faces off against the Chicago Bears. The Bears defense has really been solid. But to be honest with you, you may just have to ride with the hot hand in Brock Purdy in your championship round. Or if you're still in your consolation bracket fighting for third place or so on and so forth, I would still start Brock Purdy. But Brock Purdy, what a performance it was overall for the 49ers. And he earns our quarterback stud of the week. Now let's go on to our running back stud of the week. That's going to be Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. And early on this season, we probably would have had Chase Brown as overall disappointment. But now he has kind of flipped his season around. He's a top 10 fantasy running back this season in the Bengals Sunday afternoon game. He had 12 attempts, 66 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown against Miami. He also capped his day with 4 receptions, 43 yards, 2 touchdowns to close out his day in Week 16 with 32.9 fantasy points. So it was kind of a slow start overall for the Bengals in that game, especially for Chase Brown heading into the half. You're kind of wondering, would this be another dud performance that Brown was going to put up? But nonetheless, he was able to turn around, especially with those 2 receiving touchdowns. He was able to tack on another rushing touchdown at the end of that game. And Chase Brown, once again, has another nice matchup. So Chase Brown would definitely be a must-start candidate. We will definitely get to that in our starts and sits. But there's definitely a lot of candidates at the running back position. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey had another big game. But got to give it credit to Chase Brown, especially with Joe Burrow coming back from his injury a couple of weeks ago. He has really been influenced by Burrow's return, especially with the 2 quarterbacks that you have, both with Drake Browning and Joe Flacco. It's definitely going to be nice. And looking forward to 2026. Chase Brown, he was in the middle rounds. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Chase Brown is an early round pick heading into next season. All right, we do have a comment coming in here. Let's go ahead and answer this here. Taysom Hill, Schultz, or Tungs. I would go with Schultz in this one. It is a tough matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers. Tungs is more than likely going to be the tight end 1 for the 49ers, especially with George Kittle dealing with an ankle sprain. Taysom Hill, they do have a nice matchup against the Tennessee Titans, but Juwan Johnson is clearly the tight end 1. So out of all of those, I would go with Dalton Schultz, even in a tough matchup. I just really like the connection between, CJ Stroud and Dalton Schultz. So I'm going to go with Dalton Schultz out of all of those three tight ends. So let's continue on with our wide receiver stud of the week. That's going to be Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. And speaking of connections, Tyler Shuck's connection to Chris Olave has flourished for the past couple of weeks. 10 receptions, 148 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. To close out one of his best fantasy outings of the season so far, 36.8 fantasy points against the Jets. Like I mentioned, the Saints next 2 weeks, they do have the Tennessee Titans on the road, and then they have Atlanta. So two, honestly, secondaries that are definitely attainable. So Chris Olave is definitely a wide receiver that you're firing up in your lineup. He has really been solid, especially with Tyler Shuck being the starting quarterback for the Saints. Moving on to our tight end stud, we'll also talk about the injury here in a couple of moments. But George Kittle of the San Francisco 49ers. So, when a team puts up 48 points, it's more than likely that we are going to have not one but two of their players. We could have had Christian McCaffrey, but we knew that CMC was going to ball out on Monday night. But George Kittle was actually the leading receiver for the 49ers yesterday. 7 receptions, 115 yards, 1 touchdown, and 24.5 fantasy points. So George Kittle, he had a strong start to the season in week number 1, did get injured in that game, was out for like 4 to 5 weeks. And then after that, it's kind of been up and down, but the past couple of games that he has been involved in, he has really been playing well. He had a touchdown last game, had a touchdown in week 16. So with injury news, just keep track of that. Heading into the new week, if George Kittle is out for this week, then you are firing up Jake Tungus if you don't have any other tight end options. Now let's move on now to the quarterback dud, and that's going to be Jackson Dart of the New York Giants, and a complete abysmal showing by the Giants overall this season. I mean, especially when you have Malik Neighbors going down with an injury, that obviously doesn't help your offense, and Cam Scatterbo. But Jackson Dart, I mean, I have never seen this bad a performance, I don't think, in quite some time. Only 33 yards passing. It felt like the Giants were just pretty content of just handing the ball off to both Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary in that matchup against the Vikings on Sunday afternoon. He only had 2 rushing attempts and 7 yards. So usually he has like those rushing yards, even a rushing touchdown to save his fantasy day. But he didn't have deadly squat on Sunday. He did throw interception that game. And yep, that is right. 1.02 fantasy points, an absolute dud. It was a tough matchup, though, going up against the Minnesota Vikings. Like most quarterbacks haven't really fared too well. So we will see with the Giants having some better matchups in the next couple of weeks. You had the Raiders in week 17. So this should be a bounce back game for both Jackson Dart and this whole entire receivers, because Wan'Dale Robinson also had a bust game. But going up against the Vikings secondary, not too many wide receivers have had many luck. But Jackson Dart is our quarterback dud of the week. We'll go to another question, then we'll get back to our running backs dud of the week. Sorry for the set my lineup question. The finals, baby. Congratulations for making the championship. Need 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, 1 flex, full PPR. So you have Juwan Jennings, Ladd McConkey. You have Terry McLaurin, Cortland Sutton, Kyron Williams, Ashton Jeanty, RJ Harvey, Fannin. If Kittle plays, if not, he is my tight end. So yeah, if Kittle plays, you're definitely rolling with him. If Kittle doesn't play, then Harold Fannin is definitely a nice complementary option that you have. So you need 2 wide receivers. Ultimately, I am starting Ladd McConkey in Cortland Sutton. Cortland Sutton has really been phenomenal, especially with the Denver Broncos offense really playing well. I know that they ended up losing the game to Jacksonville. I am trusting Ladd McConkey. It is a tough matchup for Justin Herbert going up against the Seattle Seahawks, but we did just see an explosion of Puka Nacua. Terry McLaurin, Juwan Jennings, I think that's just going to be hot and cold, boom or bust starts pretty much. Now you need 2 running backs. I am going to go with Kyron Williams and Ashton Jeanty for your 2 running backs. I'm going to actually flex RJ Harvey out of those. So overall for you, your 2 wide receivers from this list is going to be Ladd McConkey, Cortland Sutton. Your 2 running backs that you're starting is Kyron Williams and Ashton Jeanty. And your 1 flex is going to be RJ Harvey in your flex spot. So if you have any more questions or comments for your starts and sits, you can drop that in the comments, and I'll get to it as soon as it pops up here in the chat. So we will continue on with our RB dud, and that's going to go to Saturday's game. We did have two Saturday's game. We had the Commanders and the Eagles, and we had the Packers and the Bears. So Josh Jacobs, we were looking at the injury report heading into that game. Josh Jacobs was listed as questionable. He did end up playing in that one. You did see, Emmanuel Wilson in that game too. So Josh Jacobs overall, though, disappointing outing, especially where you drafted him in your preseason drafts. 12 rushing attempts, 36 yards, 2 receptions, 12 yards for only 4.8 fantasy points. So overall dud of performance for Josh Jacobs. So I'm sure that a lot of people started Josh Jacobs, and probably he cost most of you in your leagues. If not, then, we will take these duds and move on. But Josh Jacobs is the caliber for running back he has been all season. This was definitely a performance to begin on Saturday. Now let's move on. Well, we will continue with the Packers because overall for this matchup, it was just a very ugly matchup. The Bears ended up winning that game 22-16 in overtime, with DJ Moore coming out of nowhere, putting up the game of his life pretty much in the fantasy playoffs. But Christian Watson, last meeting that the Packers and the Bears faced off with just a couple of weeks back, and Christian Watson was the leading pass catcher in that game. He had 2 touchdowns, over 25 fantasy points. He was listed as questionable. He was listed on the injury report, similar to Josh Jacobs. He did end up playing in this one. It was actually Romeo Doubs being the leading receiver for the Green Bay Packers, but only 2 receptions and 17 yards for 3.7 fantasy points. And, the Bears secondary had really been attainable against opposing wide receivers. So this was definitely a disappointment for Christian Watson, because Watson has really been a stud down the stretch. I know I picked him up in my waivers for one of my leagues, and he's really balled out. I did end up bitching him, which was a good idea this week because he didn't really put up anything, only 3.7 fantasy points. But I think moving forward, if the Packers do have some better overall matchups, you are plugging in Christian Watson to your flex. But other than that, there's definitely some better wide receiver options. Parker Washington this week has a nice matchup against the Colts. And so on and so forth. Now let's move on to our next tight end dud, and that's going to be Trey McBride of the Arizona Cardinals. Only 4 catches, 27 yards, 6.7 fantasy points in the Cardinals' loss to the Atlanta Falcons on Sunday. Don't be alarmed, though, because the Cardinals face off against the Cincinnati Bengals, and they are the worst defense when it comes to defending opposing tight ends. So this is going to be the Trey McBride bounce-back game. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a couple of touchdowns and over maybe even near 100 receiving yards in this game. I think that he is definitely capable of that. So if you're a Trey McBride owner, don't panic at all. You have this is about as good as a matchup as you're going to get for Trey McBride going up against the worst defense against tight ends in the Cincinnati Bengals. So Trey McBride is our dud of the week. I know that we had some other duds like Travis Kelce, but you had Gardner Minshew tearing his ACL, and then you got to the third string quarterback. So I'm kind of opting out of Travis Kelce. But in that matchup going up against the Atlanta Falcons, I thought that Trey McBride was just going to continue to at least get a touchdown in this game. But it was a very slow game overall for this Cardinals offense. You did see Michael Wilson score himself a touchdown. Marvin Harrison Jr. didn't really have too much, only 2 catches for 14 yards. But like I mentioned, Trey McBride, not too panicked, as he will face off against a very stingy Bengals defense. We do have a comment coming in here. Let's go ahead and dive into this. Devontae Smith, who isn't reliable. Burden, Reed, Dobbs, or Pierce, or Downs. Pick one out of all of them. So honestly, Devontae Smith, I'm probably not touching him this week. All those other guys, it's kind of really up in the air, just depending on matchups. I would go with Luther Burden, especially with DJ Moore having one of his best games of the season so far. I think that Luther Burden is my pick out of all those. I can't really trust the Colts offense overall, especially with Phillip Rivers. Michael Pittman hasn't really done too much. Alec Pierce either. It's just your pick your poison with the Packers wide receivers. I just trust Luther Burden. In a nice matchup against San Francisco 49ers, that defense just gave up to 27 points to Phillip Rivers, who is pretty much nearing the age of 50. So I think that offense will bounce back. So I will go with Luther Burden out of all those wide receiver options. All right, let's go ahead now and look ahead to week 17. Let's talk about some news and injuries that happened in week number 16 that you need to be monitoring heading into week 17 of the season. So let's start off with our first news coming from the Jets. Quarterback Justin Fields' season is officially over. So more than likely it's going to be the rookie from Missouri getting his third consecutive start of the season in Brady Cook. Like I mentioned with the Jets, I'm not really even starting anybody at this point. I mean, Breece Hall hasn't really done too much. A.D. Mitchell has had a couple of nice catches for them. But really outside of that, it's just very hard to trust anybody on the Jets offense, especially when it comes to fantasy terms. So not too big of a news there, but Justin Fields' season is done. Going to the 49ers, 49ers George Kittle has a mid to low ankle sprain. Let's see if there's any more in that. Let's see. After Monday night's win against the Indianapolis Colts, San Francisco 49ers tight end George Kittle wasn't sure the extent of his left ankle injury, but he did suggest he avoided a high ankle sprain. They asked, let's see here. I don't think it's a high ankle sprain. Kittle said after the game, we'll take it one day at a time, and we'll go from there. So it's up in the air of his status for George Kittle. So just keep that in mind. So if you do have George Kittle heading into the championship, and if you have somebody on your bench, maybe you have like a Harold Fannin or Dalton Schultz, or if you need a tight end to pick up, I would go pick up Colston Loveland or Jawan Johnson. That would probably be my top two tight end options. Darren Waller of Miami. I know that you're probably going to have to deal with Quinn Ewers once again. That could be some nice complementary tight end options, especially if we do get a George Kittle another pretty much miss game, because he's had a lot of those this season, because like I mentioned earlier, he pretty much had the same injury, an ankle issue. So just keep that in mind if you do have George Kittle on your roster. We have some news from Green Bay. Jordan Love participates in walkthrough session with the Packers. He took the first steps toward returning from the concussion he sustained in Saturday's loss to the Chicago Bears. So if you weren't watching that game, the article listed, Jordan Love did suffer a concussion. We did see Malik Willis come into that game. So if Jordan Love is out, then that definitely affects the entirety of the wide receivers. That's why I was hesitant of starting, Jaden Reed or guys like Romeo Doubs. It's just really a wait and see. If you do get Jordan Love, you're firing those guys up. But if not, I would not trust Malik Willis leading this offense. So he looked pretty good, at least in the second half in that game. Vikings McCarthy is out on for this week's game against the Vikings. This is the Christmas Day game. The Vikings will face off against the Detroit Lions. He is out with a hairline fracture in his hand. So let's see. Let's see who's starting. So rookie backup Max Brosmer will start. If you have Justin Jefferson, I know that it's like a big name to start, but Justin Jefferson hasn't really played all that well this season. So really anybody on the Vikings, I just don't really trust. I know it's a nice matchup going against the Lions defense, but I just rather have other options. Go pick somebody up on the waiver wire because without J.J. McCarthy, this offense is probably not going to perform well against Detroit. The Bills, Josh Allen plans to play on Sunday despite foot injuries. That's definitely good news if you do have Josh Allen. Definitely been a rough couple of weeks for Josh Allen. He only scored around like 8 to 10 fantasy points this past Sunday. So hopefully he can bounce back in a big way for the Bills matchup in Week 17. Moving on down the line, let's see if there's any more news or injuries that we need to get here. Let me see here. Just going through the ESPN app to see if really any big injuries or news is catching my eye here. Let's see. We have some Broncos news, but I just don't see anything. Obviously, the big news from Kansas City, Gardner Minshew, it was reported that he has suffered a torn ACL, so that's now 2 quarterbacks in back-to-back weeks. Patrick Mahomes suffered the same injury in Week 15, and then Week 16, it was Gardner Minshew, so Kansas City is down to their third string. We do have some this was a week ago, but I think that's pretty much it. Let's see if there's anything that I need to bring up. I think that's all the news and injuries. Since it's Tuesday, the injury reports probably won't be coming out on Wednesday. We do have some games, like I mentioned, on Christmas. So just keep that in mind when you're setting your lineup. So I'll go through the Christmas Day games. So we have the Commanders and the Cowboys. We have the Lions and the Vikings and the Broncos and Chiefs. We do have 2 Saturday games as we did this past Saturday. We have the Texans and the Chargers, as well as the Ravens and the Packers. And then our Sunday night games, the Bears and the 49ers. And then the Monday night game is the Rams and the Falcons. So just keep the scheduling in mind. I know with the Christmas holidays coming up, you're going to be busy, hanging out with friends and family. So just make sure that you're setting your lineups in time for the Christmas games, as well as making sure you set your lineups before those Saturday as well as Sunday games. So that is your main news and injuries heading into Week 17. The big injury heading into this week is definitely going to surround George Kittle, if he's going to play or not. With an ankle sprain, it's probably doubtful at this point, but we will have to monitor that. So just keep that in mind. So that is our news and injuries. Now let's go ahead and dive into our Week 17 fantasy starts and sits. As we always do with our starts, we'll give you 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and 2 tight ends. And for the sits of the week, we will give you 1 of each position. So let's go ahead and dive into our starts of the week. Starting off with a quarterback that I also mentioned in my waiver wire video that I posted earlier today. So if you missed that, definitely go tune into that before you do set your waiver wire claims heading into the new week of this NFL season. But Trevor Lawrence is definitely a must-start candidate for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Looking at the matchup against the Indianapolis Colts, overall, it's definitely a nice matchup, especially with the injuries that the Colts have been dealing with, especially in the secondary. But Lawrence has been on an absolute tear past couple of games. Lawrence has scored 20-plus fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 outings. Looking at his Week 17 projected fantasy points is at 22.7. And, I mean, this 49ers offense just put up 48. Could the Jaguars do the same? I honestly think they could. They just put up 34 against one of the best defenses in all the league in the Denver Broncos. And this Jaguars offense has really been cooking. Look at the receivers. Jacoby Myers and Parker Washington have been leading the way. Brenton Strange has really been a solid tight end for them. And then Travis Etienne, he's coming off of in Week 15 with 2 touchdowns. In Week 16, he had a touchdown of himself. So this Jaguars offense is really, really heating up, especially with the Houston Texans really on their heels in the AFC South. But Liam Cohen has done a terrific job. Wouldn't be surprised at all if he wins Coach of the Year here in 2025. So that's our first quarterback. Let's go to the next quarterback. Start of the week, that's going to be Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers. And the theme of the quarterback starts of the week is trust the guys that have been putting up some fantasy numbers the past couple of games. The matchup against the Chicago Bears, they did hold Jordan Love in check before he did go down with an injury. You did see Malik Willis throw a touchdown to Romeo Doubs to get that game to 16-6. But ultimately, for this one, it's pretty simple. You're just trusting Purdy to continue his hot streak at home against the Chicago Bears. This is a big game for both of these teams. Both of these teams still vying for the number 1 seed in the NFC, as well as winning their respective divisions. So a big game for both of these teams. And the Bears secondary, like I mentioned, have definitely been gettable for receivers and for running backs. I do expect Christian McCaffrey to continue his dominance here in 2025. Look at the receivers. Juwan Jennings has really been nice, especially with Ricky Pearsall being injured off and on this season. And especially if you don't have George Kittle, Juwan Jennings is definitely going to get a lot of targets. And Brock Purdy, you saw it with Tonjes, with Kittle being out for earlier this year. It didn't really matter. But Brock Purdy coming off of a game where he put up 5 touchdowns, had over 30 fantasy points. I could definitely see it happening again. This could just be a back and forth game between the Bears and the 49ers. So Brock Purdy and Trevor Lawrence are our 2 quarterback starts of the week. Now let's dive into our running back starts of the week, and we're going to continue to ride with Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. A nice matchup going against the Arizona Cardinals, who've allowed 32.2 fantasy points per game to the running back position since week number 11. Like we mentioned, the studs, Chase Brown coming off of a 3-touchdown performance, 2 through the receiving game and 1 through the rushing game. So Chase Brown really has been consistent, especially with the return of Joe Burrow. In this offense, you have T. Higgins, back and healthy. And you also have Jamar Chase. So Chase Brown, looking at this matchup against the Arizona Cardinals, this could be a back and forth game where both offenses are maybe putting up 30 or plus points in this game. So Chase Brown projected 20.9 fantasy points So definitely inflated for a nice matchup against the Arizona Cardinals. Bijan Robinson just had 29 fantasy points in PPR formats. Could Chase Brown do the same? I think he definitely could do that, especially if he can find the end zone 2 or more times. We're also starting Javonte Williams of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, Javonte Williams coming off of a dud performance in Week 16. I do expect to bounce back here in Week 17, especially with a nice matchup going up against the Washington Commanders. This Commanders defense have allowed 623 rushing yards to the running back position since week number 11. Saquon Barkley had himself a touchdown and over 70 rushing yards in their game on Saturday. So I definitely think that Javonte Williams could do the same. Overall, he has been one of the more consistent running backs in fantasy. I think a lot of people are very hesitant of even picking Javonte Williams at the start of the season, especially with the injuries that he's dealing with in his tenure with the Broncos. But now with Dallas, I know that Dak Prescott has kind of been shaky down the stretch here, but I do trust Javonte Williams in the spot against a plus matchup in the Commanders. So Javonte Williams and Chase Brown are our 2 running back starts. Moving on to the pass catchers, we're going to go to the New York Giants offense for Wan'Dale Robinson. A pretty good matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders. This defense have allowed the 9th most points to the wide receiver position. Just look at what happened last week to the Giants. Jackson Dart only had 1 fantasy point. Wan'Dale Robinson had a couple of catches. He did have a couple of rushing yards as well. Just overall disappointment. Wan'Dale Robinson was, I believe, one of our sits for last week. Now back to our starts going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. The secondary just have allowed a lot of yardage to the wide receiver position. So overall, I expect this Giants offense to bounce back in what could just be a back and forth game, because we did see Ashton Jeanty have himself a game for the Raiders in Week 16. Moving on to the next wide receiver, Stephon Diggs for the New England Patriots. What a breakout game it was for Diggs on Sunday night against the Baltimore Ravens. He did 9 of 10 targets for 138 yards. And the Patriots comeback win against Baltimore on the road. Now they get the Jets. Just look at what the Jets gave up to Chris Olave. Jawan Johnson also had a big game as well. And Stephon Diggs has clearly taken over as the wide receiver 1. You had earlier this season, Kayshon Boutte had a couple of big games. But it looks like Stephon Diggs has really taken over this receiving room. You see the connection between him and Drake May. So overall, I just think that the Patriots are just going to wipe the floor away with the Jets. The Jets are just a very bad football team at this point in the season. So Stephon Diggs, to me, it just feels like he's going to continue his dominant streak against kind of these bad defenses here. Now let's move on to the tight end. We're going to go to another rookie, Harold Fannin Jr. of the Cleveland Browns. Will get the start of the week for the tight end position. The matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers, pretty good on paper. Fannin has also scored double digits in 4 straight games. So Shadur Sanders, Dylan Gabriel, it doesn't really matter who's the quarterback. Harold Fannin has clearly taken over as the tight end 1, especially with David Njoku being banged up for the majority of the season. He did get a touchdown in the Week 16 game when the Browns were clearly in that game for the majority of that. But Shadur Sanders has looked early and often to Harold Fannin. So I definitely think that this is definitely a must-start option for Harold Fannin. Let's move on to our next tight end, and that's going to be Brendan Strange of the Jacksonville Jaguars. The matchup against the Indianapolis Colts. Just look at what the Colts defense gave up to George Kittle. Brendan Strange himself has also really been playing well for the past couple of weeks, especially with the Jaguars offense really finding their identity here in their winning streak. But the Colts have allowed the 12th most points to the tight end position. So Brendan Strange, I know there's a ton of pass catchers. You have Parker Washington, Brian Thomas, Jacoby Myers. However, Trevor Lawrence has been looking to Brendan Strange, and Strange, like I mentioned, like Harold Fannin, has been one of the more consistent tight end options that you can find in the market. All right, so that is our Week 17 starts of the week. Now let's dive into the other side of the spectrum as we go to Week 17 fantasy sits. In the first sit, we'll go to the quarterback position, Justin Herbert of the Los Angeles Chargers. I know that this is a big name that we are sitting here in Week 17, but the matchup is about as difficult as you're going to find as they're going up against the Houston Texans. And the Texans have been the number 1 defense when it comes to defending opposing quarterbacks. They've allowed the fewest points to the quarterback position. I mean, Houston has really been dominant this season. I mean, Justin Herbert is a nice quarterback. The offense is going to do wonders. Ladd McConkey, wouldn't be surprised if he gets a couple of receptions and get to where you need him to be. The running back with Martin Hampton. Overall, I just think that this is going to be a lower scoring game between the Texans and the Chargers. Wouldn't be surprised if it's like 24 to 17 type of ball game like that. However, there are definitely some quarterbacks that have some better matchups. I would rather have like Sam Darnold or even Trevor Lawrence over Justin Herbert this week. Now let's move on to our running back sit, Rico Dowdle of the Carolina Panthers. When it really comes to the sits, we're really looking at the matchups. So the matchup for Rico Dowdle is also bad as going up against the Seattle Seahawks, who've allowed the second fewest points to the running back position. It's really become a split backfield once again in Carolina between Rico Dowdle and Chuba Hubbard. So he's projected to get 11.1. He's more than likely going to need a touchdown to reach that mark. I just don't think that he's going to get the rushing volume in this game that's going to get you there without that rushing touchdown. Hopefully you can get some receiving yards to get him over that 10-plus fantasy point mark, especially if you do play in PPR formats. However, this matchup against the Seattle Seahawks is definitely going to be tricky for this entire Panthers offense to operate. Now let's move on to our next wide receiver sit of the week. That's going to be Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. The secondary have allowed just 6 touchdowns to the wide receiver position. We pretty much did a rinse and repeat. We had Deebo Samuel going up against the Eagles. Didn't really do too well. Khalil Shakir last week with Josh Allen struggles and then pretty much just handing the ball off numerous of times to their bell cow running back in James Cook. So Khalil Shakir, overall tough matchup. Overall, this Bills offense has struggled, especially in the passing volume. The rushing volume has really been there for pretty much the majority of the season. But Khalil Shakir, there's definitely some more better wide receiver options over him for the week. Now let's move on to our next sit of the week. That's going to be Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. Just coming off a game where he just had 1 catch for 6 yards to get you to that 1.6 fantasy points. Matchup also tough on paper going up against the Denver Broncos. And overall, it's not just like the Broncos defense being really good this season. It's just that the Chiefs are starting the third-string quarterback. Like I mentioned, Patrick Mahomes tore his ACL as well as Gardner Minshew. So the Chiefs are down to their third-string quarterback. I mean, this offense only scored only field goals against one of the worst teams in the league in the Tennessee Titans. Now they get the Denver Broncos, who are coming off of a loss. Probably won't go too well for the Chiefs on Christmas Day. So overall for Travis Kelce, probably not going to be a good day for him on fantasy football. So like I mentioned, I'd rather guys like Dalton Schultz, Brendan Strange, Jawan Johnson. There's so many tight ends I would rather have starting this week over Travis Kelce. If it was Patrick Mahomes, this would be a different story. But it's just hard to trust when the Chiefs go all the way down to the depth chart, especially with the elite cornerbacks and linebackers that the Broncos have on that defensive roster. So that's our starts and sits of the week. Now let's go ahead and close out the show with how our team did in our constellation bracket. We were pretty much fighting for third place in this league. If you missed us last week, we did end up losing in the first round, which was 2 weeks. It was week 14 and week 15. And then heading into this round, it's week 16 and week 17. So our season will conclude here heading into this week. But heading into this one, we were facing off against Mushrooms, who did end up losing in that first round battle as well. We'll also look at the championship. But looking at this, we pretty much cruised to an early lead heading into round, I guess pretty much part 2 of this round 2 battle between us and Mushrooms. We ended up taking this first part, 144.88 to 67.6. Looking at the roster, you will see he probably doesn't even check his fantasy app anymore. But nonetheless, we will look at the box score and see how our players did. So looking at our starting quarterback, we did end up going with Bo Nix. As you can see, wrong decision. We are definitely going with Trevor Lawrence the rest of the way there. I thought it was going to be a nice matchup. I thought this was going to be a higher scoring game, and it was. Jacksonville won 34-20. But Bo Nix only getting 15 points. Patrick Mahomes obviously on the IR. He gets 0. Running backs, this was our best that our running backs have done all season long. Saquon had 21.2. Chase Brown had 32.9 for us. Looking at his opposing running backs, Bijan Robinson continues to be pretty much the RB1 in fantasy, along with CMC, 29.8. Kamani Vidal, only 1.1. Receivers, JSN, 23.6. Amike Ibuka, a hot start to the season, continues to be a faller in fantasy. 5 points for him. Looking at his wide receivers, Drake London returned from injury against Arizona. He had a 5.7. Devontae Smith had 16.2. And then looking at the tight ends, George Kittle, a smash start for us, 24.5. Travis Kelce for him at 1.6. Looking at our flex, Amarian Hampton, a dominant performance for the Chargers in their win against the Cowboys led to him getting to 16.5 fantasy points. Wan'Dale Robinson in his flex spot only got 5.2. And, looking at our defenses, pretty similar. The Packers with -3 and the Seahawks with -4. And our kickers both got in the double digits. Chase McLaughlin had 10, and Eddie Pinheiro had 11. So looking at where we probably could have made some changes, obviously Trevor Lawrence and RJ Harvey, man, 22 points. Even in the loss against the Jags, he may get a spot start here heading into Week 17. Same with Chris Rodriguez. Even in a tough matchup against the Eagles, he finishes with 13.9 points. Looking at the championship matchup, we got a doozy here. A lot of points scored in this championship game between Ben's best team and the Birds. The Birds heading into part 2 of this matchup leads 194.8 to 174.68. Just looking at the overall players, I mean, you had for Ben's best team as top players, Matthew Stafford, CMC, Derrick Henry, Chris Olave. For the Birds, it was Puka Nacua, George Pickens, and Courtland Sutton, and James Cook leading the way for his team. So looks like the Birds with an epic collapse is probably going to win this overall league. But this is probably, let's be honest with you, probably the 2 best teams of the league. So definitely deserve to be in the championship. Before we go look at our team, let's go ahead and look at the overall waiver wire. I'll go through each of the positions and give you some advice of some players that you could pick up as well for your respective teams. Let's start off with the quarterbacks, at least for this league that are available. Top ones are Jared Goff. Jared Goff, though, has a tough matchup against the Minnesota Vikings. If Jordan Love does get the start against Baltimore, this could be a plug-and-play option for you. Same with Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett against the Cincinnati Bengals, it just feels like an easy 20 points. I know Brissett kind of have a dud performance, only 11 fantasy points in Week 16. But really outside of that, you're not really starting too many quarterbacks. So if you do need a streamer, the top options would be Jordan Love and Jacoby Brissett heading into Week 17. Now let's look at the running backs to see which ones that you could pick up. Zach Charbonnet against the Carolina Panthers. I mean, it's pretty much a split backfield between Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. So I look somebody else. Michael Carter would definitely be a nice option going up against Cincinnati Bengals. He is projected to score 12.8. Really, other than that, I mean, Devin Singletary against the Las Vegas Raiders would be a nice option. Blake Corum against Atlanta Falcons. But I think that definitely the top ad of the week would have to be Michael Carter out of all these running back options. Moving on to the receivers, we do have DJ Moore available. Troy Franklin, definitely a nice ad, especially with the matchup against Kansas City. Really, other than that, there's not really too many wide receivers that are really catching my eye. So Troy Franklin would be my must-start ad. I mean, A.D. Mitchell against the Patriots, that's a tough matchup for them. Shamar Dyke could also be an option going up against the Saints. Dyke did have a receiving touchdown as well. Parker Washington also a nice ad going up against the Colts. Let's see if there's any other wide receivers. I don't really see any other options. So I'll definitely go pick up Jalen Coker, Parker Washington, Shamir Dyke, and Troy Franklin for the week. Moving on to the tight ends, Harold Fannin obviously would be a must-start. Dalton Schultz, I know it's a tough matchup. I just think that he is going to finish with where we really need him to this week. Juwan Johnson also would be an ad for the week. Colson Loveland and Darren Waller, even with Quinn Ewers starting against Tampa Bay, who's 14th against tight ends. All right, let's go ahead to the defenses. Let's see who are the top defenses to stream. The top defenses, in my eyes, will be the Lions. I think that's clearly the number one option, especially with Minnesota having to go to their backup quarterback. The Saints is also a nice option. Honestly, the Saints have really been a dark horse defense, especially with their schedule really easing up. They have a nice matchup against the Tennessee Titans. That offense has really been playing well, especially with Tony Pollard. But the Lions going up against the Vikings and the Saints against the Tennessee Titans would be my top two, streaming candidates. If you do need a defense for this week, you could also go with Tampa Bay against Miami, especially with Quinn Ewers getting the start once again. The Chargers against Houston, that could be a roll of the dice. But I think that the two safest options this week for defenses would be the Lions and the Saints. All right, let's go back to our team. Let's go ahead and set our roster and see if we can get this third place locked up. So trying to finish as high as we can here in standings to close out this 2025 campaign. So I am going to go with Trevor Lawrence over Bo Nix. That is definitely going to be a start. We're going to go with George Kittle, but we do have Tyler Warren, ready to go if we do need him. But, man, Tyler Warren, let's look at his past couple of weeks. So he's still a top 5 tight end in all of fantasy football. But the past couple of weeks, especially with Phillip Rivers being the quarterback, it's been 3 points, 4, and 6. So we could also get another option there. We could drop Alvin Kamara. We don't really know if we're going to get Kamara back at any point for this season. Looking at the other ones, we're definitely getting rid of Emeka Egbuka. I think we are going to go with Christian Watson in this matchup there. I think that Christian Watson could definitely bounce back, especially if Jordan Love is back. But we could also go with another option from the waiver wire if I do feel the need to do so. And looking at this, Martin Hampton and going up against the Houston Texans, I think we're going to play the matchup here. We are going to go with Chris Rodriguez. We also could go with R.J. Harvey against the Chiefs, but I just feel like overall matchup-wise for the Cowboys, I think that's a plus matchup for Chris Rodriguez. So I think that this is going to be our lineup heading into Week 17. We'll have Trevor Lawrence be our starting quarterback. Saquon and Chase Brown will be our 2 starting running backs. And JSN and Christian Watson. Christian Watson going up against Baltimore. Stephon Diggs coming off of a stellar game. Especially if Jordan Love plays, it's ultimately going to hinge if Jordan Love does get the start on Saturday night against the Ravens. If he does, I do feel really good about Christian Watson. We will keep George Kittle for now, but we will keep in mind that injury. If we don't have George Kittle, we could either go with Tyler Warren or one of those tight end options off of the waiver wire. With our flex, we will go with Chris Rodriguez, just really playing the matchups, going up against the Dallas Cowboys, who are at the bottom of the league against stopping opposing fantasy running backs. Seahawks, I do expect them to bounce back overall as a unit. They had -4 fantasy points in last week's game on Thursday night against one of the best offenses in the league. They do get Carolina on the road, and then Chase McLaughlin going up against the Miami Dolphins. He's really been solid for us as a kicker for the past couple of weeks. So we're projected right now to get 129.7 fantasy points, and hopefully we can go ahead and clinch this third place battle there. So that's going to be it for our weekly live show here in Week 17. We will be back next week, probably back on our regular time slot on Wednesday. Had to move it up, especially with the Christmas holidays. They're pretty much starting with Christmas Eve tomorrow and Christmas Day on Thursday. So good luck to everyone who is in their championship. Hopefully you're able to win and bring a title home this week to close out what's been a really nice fantasy football season in 2025. So that's going to be it for us for tonight's show. If you do have any comments, you can always drop it whenever we, in this live stream. So if you have any more comments when it goes to starts and sits, just drop them in the chat, and I will look at them and answer it to you as quickly as possible. So I hope everybody has a Merry Christmas. We will, kind of continue the content. We're probably going to take a little bit of a break, especially with the Christmas holidays, but we will continue on for fantasy football content for next week as we pretty much close the book on this 2025 season. We'll look back on Week 17 to see how our team did, to see how all of our players did as well. And we will also look at the overall season of, some disappointments, as well as some players who outperformed their ADPs this season. So I appreciate everybody tuning in. Have a Merry Christmas, and we'll see you all next time.